Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to WatchBox and thanks for logging on. As usual, everything you see here is for sale. Reach out to me, tmosso at thewatchbox.com for purchase and pricing details. Names, references, and when available, prices are available in the description below. Some of these watches do not have prices associated with them. We can quote you a price, just reach out to me. And of course, some of these watches are not listed on our website, so you will only see them here. Our last big shopping day before the holiday, but we are still buying watches. If you're interested in selling a watch, maybe you don't get the one you want for the holiday and you're looking to trade it towards the one you do, reach out to me yet again. tmosso at thewatchbox.com. All right, let's roll. And let's literally roll with Michael Schumacher, part of a series of 3 models launched by Omega in 1996. This is the Speedmaster automatic Schumacher. Now, the Schumacher is a nickname, but there was no mistaking the intent of these watches. As they were launched with Michael Schumacher as the spokesman, they came in a distinctive motorsports-themed package. Of course, they have the signature staggered checker racing dial that Omega has propagated across the Speedmaster range since the late 60s, and most importantly, they were primary colors, red, blue, and yellow, for, respectively, Michael Schumacher's 3 teams at the point: Ferrari, Benetton, and yellow, where he got his start in F1, Jordan, back in 1991. And this is the most uncommon of the Schumachers. Yellow, Jordan yellow, and of course you've got that vintage plexi on top of a 39mm steel case. And as you can see, the strap is perfectly keyed to the watch, which is perfectly sized. If you want a historically important Speedmaster model that looks absolutely scintillating, in superb condition, with a famous spokesman, and I have to say that the F1 appeal of this does endear it to me. This is a great way to get into that type of Omega. And as you can see, this is an Omega factory strap with a lovely double spline bolstering, handsome and probably the liveliest of the Schumachers. That said, some folks are traditionalists, and I mean very traditional, to the point that we're turning the clock back first to 2001 and then 1938. This is the Omega Museum Watch 1, the Pilot's Watch 1938. It is 40.5 millimeters in diameter by only 11.9 millimeters thick, and as you can see, it references a model in the Omega Factory Museum, a 1938 pilot's watch with a manually settable bidirectional pilot-style bezel. Now, of course, the watch is actually in setting mode right now because I wanted to demonstrate that it has lovely cathedral hands, historically inspired, and the watch is loomed. The timepiece is absolutely gorgeous, with a coining outboard, strong arcing lugs inside an ETA 2895 and a high grade. You can see this is the first of the Omega Museum pieces. Roll it all over, and the dial remains as striking today as it was back in 2001, or for that matter, 1938. And you can see there's actually a metallic plinth that rotates with the bezel internally. You could still use it in this day and age to line up in time using either the minute hand or the hour hand, as the bezel is calibrated up to 12 hours. Now, the timepiece wears large on the wrist. Although technically a 40.5, the lugs mean it has substantial distance across the wrist. So you're going to want to think of this as more of a 43mm watch. It's very slender and it's comfortable, but it has a lot of presence. If you've got that wrist smaller than 15 centimeters circumference, this is probably too big for you. That said, smaller wrists will love the latest generation of the Omega Seamaster Professional Diver 300 meter. Now, this is the 25th anniversary model, as it's known, launched in 2018, celebrating 25 years since the 1993 debut of what has been by far the most enduring and famous Omega Seamaster design of all time. Of course, it rose to fame in 1995 in its quartz form on the wrist of Pierce Brosnan in his inaugural turn as 007 in GoldenEye. Later, he wore the chronometer in his final 3 turns as Bond, and the timepiece you see here is the direct descendant of that Bond chronometer. 42 millimeters as of 2018. It wears the same as the old watch because now the end links are pivoted, which means the distance across the wrist is actually slightly less than the 41 on the former bracelet. Quality's taken a turn for the best, and I mean that both compared to the previous 41 and compared to the watch that Brosnan wore. Of course, you can see this one features an all-applique index dial rather than the printed dials of the Pierce era. You've also got those famed Bond-style skeletonized hands, and the Omega Wave After taking a hiatus from 2012 to 2017, it's back. And this one, as with the others, features a ceramic dial, but this one features a chromium bronze that's best described as a sort of slate gray metallic, but it does have a distinct sheen to it. And you can see that this dial glows warmly in my light box. It's thinner than any Planet Ocean, which means it still wears well underneath the cuff if you do have to shake, stir, and wear it with a tuxedo. Rolling around the bracelet, things have improved again since the Bond years. The bracelet is less rounded on its shoulder links now, so you can see how there's a sharper break with the flank, meaning this bracelet looks more like a sports watch bracelet compared to the dressy bracelet of the originals. Another upgrade, screw-fixed removable links. You've got another change for 2018, which is the addition of a push-button slider alongside the long-running fold-out dive extension. So you've got this incremental sizer built in, but then you've got the ability to pull it all the way out over a dive suit or a thick sweater or coat. Half links built on both sides of the bracelet, so you do have quite a few options to size this. Ceramic bezel insert with cold enamel fill for the characters. You've got this new for 2018 conical helium escape valve. Bond's was once used memorably as a grenade. This one will be more of a discussion piece, as very few are going to engage in the kind of saturation diving that requires a helium escape valve, but in a nutshell, it prevents helium that might accumulate from blowing out the seals and sapphire of your watch. Another big change versus the Pierce era, we've now got a display case back on the standard Diver 300 meter. Specs are upgraded. Now a 55-hour power reserve, full balance bridge with a free-sprung index. It's more shock resistant than the old 2500. It's more accurate. It has a silicone hairspring. It is effectively amagnetic. All of that, and it's got the features you expect on a modern luxury movement, including a quick set and hacking seconds. It is very accurate, and while it does meet the COSC standards, the Omega Master chronometer standard goes beyond that to include 6-position testing, not 5, full watch testing, not a bare movement, shock resistance, winding efficiency, power reserve, and anti-magnetism. So this Master chronometer has the full suite of features. It is a formidable watch and one of the best buys on the market. Don't wait for a sub, just get this. That said, I still like Rolex, but I'm always a little bit of a contrarian when it comes to the models I like. And the current generation Milgauss, especially in its Z Blue and white dial variants, absolutely zing me. Now, this was a watch that launched with the original 116-400 back in 2007. Technically, that was the third generation Milgauss, and only the third since the mid-50s. But whereas the GV Glace Vert, or green crystal, was the heartthrob initially, it was this model, discontinued after 2014, that ultimately became the most collectible among them. And as you can see here, this is not a silver white dial. This is white. This is Cliffs of Dover. Even more intriguing, it is a matte white rather than a gloss. So the printing on the dial contrasts highly. You've got blackened indices with orange luminova, and note that there's a different color lume used for the indices and the hands. You've also got that lightning bolt seconds hand, which, though a bit whimsical, actually references the original 1950s watch. And then you have orange printing on the dial base with a Rolex applique crown. The watch is 40 millimeters in diameter, but it's only 13.3 millimeters thick, and as you can see, it's one of the few modern Rolex watches for which the end links don't really project beyond the lugs, so approximately 49.7 millimeters end to end across the wrist is the true size of this watch. 48-hour power reserve, automatic winding, 100 meters water resistant. It is a certified chronometer. It's got all of that good stuff, plus it's considerably more than Milgauss. So if you think of Milgauss as 1000 Gauss antimagnetic or 80,000 ampere per meter, that was the case with the original soft iron inner cage. But once you add the nickel-phosphorous escapement and the niobium-zirconium hairspring in this watch, I would not be shocked if it's actually multiples of Milgauss. I think just about every standard watch with the Parachrom Blue hairspring today is 1000 Gauss anti-magnetic. So you're actually getting a lot more with this one. Plus, no date, no Cyclops eye, a beautifully balanced dial. We're not done with Omega Mania. I saved the best for last. This model came out in 2018, and it was easily the edgiest watch Omega had launched in a long time. The Speedmaster Moon Watch, Dark Side of the Moon, Apollo 8. This is a timepiece that takes the basic bones of a moon watch caliber, a Dark Side of the Moon case, and then uses laser ablation to create a dial unlike anything else. Now, the reference is obvious. Apollo 8, December 1968. They would have witnessed an Earthrise over the edge of the moon as they orbited the moon and passed through its dark side out of contact with mission control. We'll see you on the other side. This is a watch that is fully realized, as every single freaking part was envisioned as a component of the special series. This is also one of the few Speedmaster special series that is both not a limited edition and almost impossible to obtain. This is a watch that new was almost continuously sold out. Well, you can get this one pre-owned, but let me tell you, interest in these is sky high, and that's without a limited edition. The dial, of course, is open with the movement visible underneath, and that is the caliber right there, the 1869. You've also got a racing track outboard. Remember we saw the Schumacher earlier? You have that checkered flag style racing track for the minutes and seconds. Well, you've got the same right here, which is unaccustomed and unexpected, but much appreciated. You've also got a full 44.25 millimeter scratch-resistant ceramic case that is feather light. This watch is almost all sapphire, and ceramic, which means it really is wispy on the wrist. In spite of its size, it's only about 50 millimeters across the wrist, and it is thinner than a standard dark side of the moon by a huge margin because of the manual wind moonwatch caliber compared to the standard dark side of the moon and its caliber 9300. Now, this is a spectacular watch with the lights off. We're going to do a lume shot. There you go. Dark side of the moon, meet close encounters. You'll also note that the crown has a lumed insert. I adore this. The tachymeter is fully lumed. This is something that came along with the gray side of the moon, and in good taste, it's been continued over to this special edition watch. Now, flipping it over, you can see that the movement is anything but standard. It is a moonwatch caliber, so technically identical, 21.6 beat rate, cam, lateral clutch, 48-hour power reserve, but it too has received the laser ablation treatment, and then all of the components of the chronograph are a lovely satin silver and steel. So this is a handsome looking movement. Aesthetically, it's the equal of the 1863, but it has an entirely unique look to it. Now, let's go high horology. Let's go sky high horology. And I mean the heavens. This is a special 5-piece grade 5 titanium limited edition Govberg Jewelers de Bethune DB25 Starry Varius. Now, the standard Starry Varius came out in 2018 and it wasn't quite this fetching. It was good, but this is perfect. Grade 5 titanium, 42 millimeters in diameter. It removes the silver aspects of the original Starry Varius dial. It thins out the hour track, casts it entirely in fired blue titanium, and then it expands the center dial with the band of the Milky Way laid alternately in applied gold leaf. And if you look at it obliquely, you can see the hand-applied white gold cabochon that form the stars. Those are actually inserted individually into the dial. So the watch looks larger, far more dramatic, and there's discretion and modesty in this timepiece, as the de Bethune labeling is almost invisible, ghosted onto a fired titanium dial. And this process for firing and bluing titanium is patented by de Bethune. Now, you can see the DB25 is a more conventional watch than the DB28 or the DB27. It has conventional lugs. As a result, it sits normally on your wrist. You don't feel like you're ready to answer the call from Starfleet Command or engage with hostile Klingons. It's not that kind of watch. It's beautiful. It's remarkably expressive. It's colorful. It's charming, and it's handsomely made. What it is not is extroverted until you turn it over. And then this is where the special edition, the 5-piece series, is considerably more Baroque than the original. The entire movement, yes, all of it has been black polished. Forget black polished screws and regulators. We're talking bridges and plates, manual wind, 6-day power reserve, twin self-adjusting barrels, patented, fired blue titanium, a patented process, balance, hairspring, and shock protection, all patented. You're getting a lot of proprietary technology here. Now, the watch features a titanium and white gold balance, which is one of at least 8 individual balances de Bethune has patented. And keep in mind, this is a company that has produced fewer than 2,800 watches since its 2002 founding, and about 150 new ones issue from the factory each year. So this is 5 out of about, well, 150 for the year. Extraordinary exclusivity, but also fine finish in the traditional mold. As you can see, the mirrored anglage glowing, rounded, broad, We're talking Voudelainen level of beveling. It is that good, that broad, and you can appreciate it without a loop. That's how handsomely this is all executed. You have 1, 2, 3 shock protection springs for the balance. All of this designed with chronometry and durability in mind. And yes, that is a solid rose gold plaque inside the movement declaring the model, the reference, and the individual numbering. This is 4 of 5. We're not done though. From my favorite brand, bar none, comes the Dream Watch 3. Launched in 2009, this is a timepiece that is difficult to categorize, except to say that de Bethune founding partner and lead stylist David Zanetta of Italy was primarily a vintage dealer for most of his career, so this watch incorporates elements from pendant watches and vintage pocket watches, and you could see that in the presence of a bullhead crown, baroquely finished. I would say it's Rococo more than Baroque. The center dial is a microlight engraving. It's what de Bethune has long used in lieu of traditional guilloche, but it is cut exactly the same way reductively. It's not a stamped center. We have globes of titanium that act as our hour indices, and then we have that same fired blue oxidation, except here it's been matte finished, so it's a warm tone rather than highly reflective. There's a serrated track inboard against which the hours can be read, and then the pièce de résistance, it is the tourbillon. Now we have another proprietary de Bethune balance wheel here, white gold rim, silicon wheel, and silicon spokes. Now the reason for this is to put as much of the mass outboard as possible, reduce aerodynamic drag, and of course minimize the thermal coefficient, so hot or cold will not meaningfully interrupt the operation or change the rate of the watch. Now you can see that the tourbillon carriage is constructed entirely of titanium, white gold, and silicon, meaning it only weighs 0.18 gram, or I should say it has a mass of 0.18 gram. It is the lightest tourbillon in the world. It features a silicon escapement, full silicon escapement, the company's own hairspring, which beats like an overcoil concentrically without the thickness and shock susceptibility of an overcoil. Now, in spite of the fact that this is a power-intensive complication, or I should say refinement, the watch still has an extraordinary power reserve of 5 days. And you may be asking, why is that extraordinary? Well, because the tourbillon is power-hungry. The watch, surprisingly, is not huge. In spite of 5 days of power reserve, even with a tourbillon regulator, the timepiece is only about 49 millimeters from lug to lug, and then if you measure the case itself, it's just over 42 millimeters, with the distance across the wrist, if we measure the outermost points, of 51 millimeters. I'm going to put it on my wrist. You're going to see how well it wears, but it was one of the earliest experiments with mobile lugs on a de Bethune timepiece, and you can see it has those not quite, we're not going to call these the floating lugs. These are the spring-loaded lugs, the mobile lugs. There's a hinge lug up at 12 o'clock. So the watch really does bridge the difference between pendants and pocket watches and wrist watches. Now you can see, even though my wrist is not huge, the watch doesn't wear immensely. At less than 50 millimeters from lug to lug, this is a timepiece that wears effectively like a 40 millimeter round watch. So if you need a sense of what it's like that. 11.9 millimeters thick, it'll slip underneath the cuff, and you can see that here to good advantage. The watch is extraordinarily rare. If I had to guess, I would say probably 12 or fewer of these were made, and this watch is platinum, in case you're wondering, and it's special because only one can be number one, and that's exactly what this is. Number one, 2009 Dream Watch. The Dream Watch 3, the best that the company can offer, with a power reserve indicator hidden on the reverse side. And I should mention, de Bethune makes every part of its watch, the movement, the dial, and the case, so you're getting a fully realized proprietary effort, sparing no expense, farming nothing out. All right, we're going to talk about FP Journe a bit. Now, this is an independent that has probably hit its stride more than ever in the last year. Not new, having been established in 1999 by well-known engineer and white label movement constructor Francois-Paul Journe. It is, nevertheless, a company that all of a sudden seems to be at the center of the horological universe, occupying the hegemonic mind share of the independent scene previously claimed by Richard Mille. Now, this is a model, the Journe Resonance, which was originally launched back in 2000, a world premiere. Journe took the resonance principle previously seen on pendulums, mostly pendulum clocks and metronomes, and he applied it to a balance escapement, so a Swiss lever with a balance. And the idea is that these two separate movements in one case, two barrels, two drivetrains, two escapements, two balances, no physical coupling between them, but they will gradually synchronize recognized due to the resonance phenomenon. I should mention this watch, part of a series of 38 pieces and 5 different models in 38 copies, launched for 2015 to celebrate the end of the 38mm case, which means not only is this watch made of stainless steel, but it was the last of the 38mm resonance watches, and it features the symmetrical 1212 dial featured on the Resonance 1 and 2. So this is a much-loved dial. And if you look closely, you can see that all the printing on it is in blue, a subtle distinction to let you know that this watch is something special. They're normally printed in black. 38mm in stainless steel. You should note that it features a matching stainless steel deployant clasp. Steel is rarely used on Journe watches, only for the most special of special editions, such as this and, for example, the Holland and Holland, or on chiming watches where its singing, ringing sustain is highly prized. Now, of course, this is a dual-time watch. You can set the 2 registers separately. Resonance just means that they will self-correct. If one deviates running fast or slow, the other will correct it, and that's the idea of a resonance chronometer. But it takes 7 to 10 minutes for the resonance phenomenon to gain purchase on the 2 balances, so these seconds hands aren't always in sync. So you pull the flyback trigger, if you have nails, you pull the flyback trigger down at 4 o'clock, and it synchronizes the seconds hands. Everything's wound and set using a bullhead winder, and this is a rare rose gold movement stainless steel case. 38 of these were made, and you get started with this one. Pretty soon you start thinking about collecting the entire 5-piece set from that 5-piece times 38 limited edition in 2015. A very special watch. If you're going to own just one FP Journe, it really should be the Tourbillon Remontoir or one of the resonance chronometers. Now, speaking of resonance chronometers, we're going to take a break from them and then come back to them. Let's talk about my favorite FP Journe model. This is the Journe Optimum. I know, another Journe. What sets it apart? A few things. First, it is a more accurate watch. In fact, this is the most accurate mechanical watch FP Journe knows how to make. Launched back in 2012, it wasn't originally available in 42mm, though here you can see it in the rare Option 42 Platinum case. White gold dial, a few things to note. First, there is a sweep seconds dial. Second, there is also a deadbeat seconds register, and it is linked to a linear spring or remontoir d'égalité, which is a buffer between the 2 mainspring barrels and the escapements. So they unload their energy to that spring every second, hence the deadbeat system built on top of it, offloads its energy to the escapement. So for the first roughly 45 hours of the 70-hour rated power reserve, you're going to have constant amplitude about the balance. That allows the watchmakers at Journe to do incredible things with the precision of the watch, knowing that they're going to get the same amount of amplitude. Now, the watch is adjusted in 6 positions, one more than the COSC standard. It has more tech downstream from the remontoir, where you will find an overcoil hairspring for concentric breathing in any position, a free-sprung architecture for stability in the face of shock, and a double direct impulse unlubricated escapement with titanium direct impulse escape wheels, so there is no Swiss lever. You can see there are 2 wheels, each one impulses the balance only in its direction of travel. This is based on the idea underpinning Abraham Louis Breguet's 1802 natural escapement. By eliminating the lever and impulsing the balance only in the direction it's already traveling, you reduce friction, improve regularity, allow for more precise regulation, and you even increase power reserve a little bit. The movement, as you can see, is big, broad, and gorgeous, with rose gold bridges and plates and twin mainspring barrels. And this is something that FP Journe does well, but we don't often talk about it. The architecture of the movement, the sort of semicircle representing the bridge on the barrel side, the finger train leading down to the escapement and the balance, and the open gulfs between them that allow you to peer into the movement. This is a strength of FP Journe. They're not just well-finished movements, they're beautifully designed from an architectural standpoint. So, once again, we are left with the most accurate watch FP Journe knows how to make using mechanical mechanisms. Is it as accurate as the Elegant 48? No, but it is vanishingly inaccurate over 24 hours, as these watches, in my own experience, have managed to maintain 0.3 to 0.5 seconds gained per 24 hours. Truly an optimized chronometer. Okay, and now, something completely different. And I'm going to let you know that of all the watches on this show, only the 5-piece de Bethune Stradivarius and the number one Dreamwatch 3 come close to the exclusivity of what you're seeing here. This was the 1 year only Resonance 4, launched for 2019 prior to the 20th anniversary model that came out this year. It was made for 1 year. The model you see here is the black label, of which only 7 examples were constructed. So, you want something no one else has? Well, you've got something that at most only 6 other people can possess, and it is a special watch. It was essentially its own thing, going back to the symmetrical dial of the Resonance 1 and 2, but not exactly that dial, as we have a 24-hour dial that gives you AM/PM distinction, so you can use this watch properly now as a travel watch, because you know whether you're looking at, for example, 2 a.m. or 2:30 a.m. or 2:30 p.m. It has the same wonderful flyback system, which remains as much fun to play with today. Fire that up. As it was back in 2000 when the very first one was born. Now, I should probably wind this up. The timepiece has a backwards running power reserve. What does that mean? Well, you can see as I'm winding it, the power reserve indicator is progressing towards 0, and that's because this is a chronometre. Oftentimes when FP Journe uses that term, the power reserve runs backwards to indicate 0 hours since fully wound. This is a nod to marine chronometers, which needed to be wound 24 hours apart at exactly the same time. So it was more important to know the hours since winding than the power reserve left. Now here's the thing. This watch, of course, has the 2 different dials, the black dial with the platinum case, and that's exclusive to FP Journe boutiques and espace. So black label doesn't just mean it's an interesting combination, an exclusive combination of black dial and platinum case. It means that you must buy this watch from a boutique or espace and be a prior purchaser of FP Journe timepieces new. So this is the ultimate in exclusivity, and because the production ended after 2019, this was a 1-year model, there will not be an 8th example of this Chronometre Resonance Black Label 2019. 7 pieces, and that is it. Now, it's a 40mm case, which puts it between the 2 watches we've just seen. We saw the 38, we saw the 42. I think 40 is Goldilocks. It is just right. You'll have more fun playing with this watch with more nails than I have, as the bullhead and the reset trigger require a little bit more than the nails I maintain for these videos. It's a ton of fun and one of the great watches of modern times in its best form. The black label, for me, for any model, is my favorite FP Journe. All right, enough dress watches. Let's talk about sports watches, but let's stick to high horology. Here we have the Patek Philippe Aquanaut 5167, and we have the Vacheron Constantin Overseas World Time. Let's start with the Patek because it's fairly simple and straightforward. Launched back in 2007, the 5167A is a gorgeous watch that's 40mm in diameter and only 8.3mm thick. As you can see from the case back, the movement is the 324, and I'll do my best to get close to that. But the 324 is a smart, well-finished, reliable, and very accurate movement that in this specification with the Patek Philippe seal, 6-position adjustment, gyro max balance, and the silicone hairspring, it'll run no worse than -3 + 2 seconds per day. Now, the watch is lovely and loomed, and we're going to showcase that here. As you can see, it features loomed numerals, but also indices. So this is a true sports watch. On top of its automatic winding and loom, I always say that the trifecta of sports watch features is automatic winding, loom, and then swimmable water resistance. And with a screw-down crown, this one is 120 meters, which means it is going to be very swimmable. Pop open the clasp, throw it on your wrist. It's flat, it's broad, it's elegant, and as you can see, it easily ducks underneath the cuff. Launched back in 1997, the Aquanaut was the first Patek Philippe sports watch to be sold from the factory with a rubber strap. And while you can get it on a bracelet, I feel that it seems more coherent on the strap. The Nautilus belongs on a bracelet, the Aquanaut belongs on the strap. And it's a handsome, versatile, and beautifully made watch. You can see every facet of this case has been manually executed, so the watch is hand-finished within and without. And of course, what would a Patek Aquanaut be without that geosphere dial? You can see on the 5167, it actually features a little bit of a gradient fade from silver or silver gray at its center to outright black at its edge. Another thing I like about the Aquanaut is that it continues something I felt was an upgrade from the Royal Oak on the Nautilus. Of course, the Nautilus came 4 years after the Royal Oak, and I thought it was a more realized design. I like the fact that the Nautilus has a bezel, a crystal, and a dial that all feature the faceting. Whereas on a Royal Oak, the dial and the crystal and the inner bezel are all round, whereas it's geometric outboard. This one features the same rounded polygon for the bezel, the crystal, and the dial form. So that's a carryover from the design norms of the Nautilus that I really like on the Aquanaut. Now, if you want to up the ante, and Vacheron certainly did in 2016 with this model, you're going to go 43.5 millimeters in steel. This is the Overseas World Time, and it is a model for which there is no Patek Philippe or Audemars Piguet or Lange equivalent. 37 time zones, and you can see the center of the dial is a lush blasted, you can see it's a blasted steel. It's absolutely gorgeous with raised and relieved landmasses. But the watch, of course, is like the other Overseas, 150 meters water resistant and anti-magnetic. And you can see I'm able to set my reference city down at the base. I can move everything in sync, or I can just move my reference city. Oh, there's an intermediate position for doing that. The subtleties of my fingernails, unfortunately, not with me. But there are two different ways of adjusting. You can adjust the time, or you can adjust the reference city. And the watch includes a removable bracelet. It actually comes with two straps, one in leather, one in rubber. It is anti-magnetic with a paramagnetic ring, so basically something that conducts magnetism. It's a bit counterintuitive, but you want actually to have something that will pull magnetic field lines around the hairspring. So rather than being a resistant material, you have paramagnetic material surrounding the movement, and it achieves the same anti-magnetism of 25,000 ampere per meter that characterized the original Overseas with the solid caseback. That was on the Overseas 2. That was an anti-magnetic watch. So is this. But unlike that watch, here we have a display caseback. And again, unlike that watch, we have Geneva hallmark on the movement, and it is a movement made by Vacheron. My favorite feature here is the multiple finishing on the rotor, which is 22 karat gold, not 21, not 18, not tungsten. You've got satin finish on the center, you've got media blasting, and then you also have high polish, and you've got this chiseled profile outboard of the compass rose at center. So this is a really good looking rotor, and one befitting the reputation of a Holy Trinity constituent brand. Taking a quick look at the clasp, a feature I like on all of these is that there is a 1.5 millimeter easy adjust built into each side of the bracelet, so you have the ability to open or close that, and that allows you to size without actually removing any links. What I also like is that every single link on the bracelet is removable, so you are going to make sure you get the perfect size. They've even built in half links, and being able to remove every single link gives you incredible flexibility. While ordinarily you might expect Vacheron to stop there, you can see that the bracelet is finished with the same degree of lavish handcraft that you will find on the bracelet of a Nautilus or a Royal Oak. It's just there's a lot more to this bracelet and this clasp than you will find on a Nautilus or a Royal Oak. A clear class leader and a wonderful travel companion, or simply for the man who has far-flung friends, family, and business associates. Let's talk about Patek Philippe for a moment, though. We talked about the Aquanaut. Let's talk about the 5270J. Surprisingly, though the watch originally launched almost a decade ago, it's taken that decade to get the first yellow gold example. Previously, Patek Philippe would always launch new models in yellow gold. Rolex tended to do the same thing. So it's unusual that we're getting a 5270J almost a decade after we first saw this model, and it incorporates everything Patek has learned since then about styling these watches. The chin has been minimized at 6 o'clock. The dial features a tachymeter outboard, and then a lovely opaline or matte silver dial with a case 41 millimeters in diameter that has exceptionally strong lug and bezel profiles. There's a lot to love here. I'll throw it on my wrist real quick, and then we'll take a look at the case back. And the case back on this watch is an event. You'll note that it's got a lot of presence. It is larger than the 5970, though not much larger. The lugs are what give the watch its span across the wrist, as the case is fairly compact and sits nicely. Flat, too, on the wrist. It'll slide underneath the cuff. Now, taking a quick look at the case back, this is what you pay for when you buy a watch like this. Anyone can do a handsome dial. Most can do handsome lugs, but when you're getting a movement of this grade, truly, you're talking somewhere between 30 and 40% of the entire price of the watch factors in the lavish handwork on this caliber 29-535 Petite Seconde. Now, taking a quick look, you can see that the lateral clutch has a black polished column wheel. The clutch, the recentering hammers, and of course the levers and horns of the chronograph are all polished steel. They're beveled on their side for a mirrored shine and satin on their top. All screw heads are black polished, as is the column wheel, and you can see that it's a free-sprung Gyromax style regulator with a 6-position adjustment and an overcoil hairspring made of a ferrous alloy. They do not use the silicone hairspring on the premier chronograph models. The timepiece, of course, features a sort of call and paw wheel that acts as the instantaneous minute jumper for the chronograph, and though you can't see it, there is a perpetual calendar built in here on the dial side. It is a perpetual calendar with a chronograph. Pusher feel, thanks to the column wheel tuning, is world class. This timepiece is exemplary. It's also a wonderful example of Patek Philippe learning on the fly, as the dial has a lot more life to it than the 2011 original. I should also mention that the watch has a lot of classicism about it, thanks to the yellow gold. It's not quite as self-consciously modern as rose gold, and it's not as frigid as platinum or white gold. This is an awesome way to get into Patek and do it in sort of a traditional profile without buying a vintage watch. That said, if you want to up the ante to almost $350,000 new, you need to talk about the 5204 1R. Launched in 2016, it's an upgrade in rose gold with full bracelet on the 5204 that launched back in 2012. Of course, it replaced the 5004 launched in 1996, and that was an impressive lineage, so this one has something to live up to. You can see it starts outboard. The watch is 40 millimeters in diameter, so it's wearable. It's not as big as it looks. You can see the immaculate break between the lug profile and the case. This is Patek case making at its best. Patek started making cases by purchasing Atelier Réuni back in 1981, and the halting steps initially were not impressive, but now Patek is doing welded lug case construction as well as any specialist in the industry, and you can really see the nuance here with the vertical kick of the bezel and then the concave profile, the fluting of the lugs, the break between case band and lug with all evidence of the welded joint removed, and the case back set back dramatically, so when it's on the wrist, the watch looks even thinner than it is, and as you can see, it easily slides underneath the cuff. Also take note, at 6 o'clock, there is a pusher adjuster aperture broken through the end link of the bracelet, and that on both sides, so you can adjust the calendar while the bracelet is still on the watch. Although you might think this is an overpowering model, the fact that it's not terribly large, nor is it terribly thick, means that it wears more with elegance than attitude. The dial is black. It is a perpetual calendar. It is a split second with a coaxial pusher inside the crown, and technically speaking, it's almost identical to the 5270. One major difference between this and the 5270, however, I'm going to show you this right now, is that the 5204 is designed to be worn every day, as it has a fully loomed dial. So when the lights are out, your watch is still on the job. I absolutely adore this piece, and I think, quite frankly, it is an underrated watch. Hard to call $350,000 model underrated, but in a world that seems to worship sports watches, I actually think this doesn't get its due. But you don't need to spend $350,000 to have fun, and this is proof. This is the Zenith El Primero 36,000 vibrations per hour, 42 millimeters in stainless steel by 12.2 millimeters thick. This is indicative of the sobriety that set in at Zenith in Le Loc after the departure of Thierry Nataf following the 2009 model year. The arrival of Jean-Frédéric Dufour, who used his revitalization of Zenith to springboard him to the CEO's chair at Rolex. Well, this is what he did to get there. Watches that are classically handsome with enduring beauty, understated, well built, good value, and, in my opinion, still as striking today as they were back in 2010. This model on my wrist is a perfect size. It's not too big, it's not too small. It has presence, but it's not brash about it. It is a dial that is black on a silver case, which means it has an enduring beauty and intensity about it. And it's not so large that it dwarfs the size of the chronograph movement underneath. Now, when you turn it over, you can see this is an El Primero caliber 400 with everything we love about El Primeros, including the column wheel lateral clutch chronograph mechanism, the 36,000 vibration per hour or 10 beat per second beat rate, and the 52-hour automatic winding power reserve. The timepiece, of course, uses the El Primero caliber, first coined in 1969 when it was the first automatic winded integrated high beat chronograph movement. Automatic winding, integrated, high beat. The 36,000 vibrations per hour means that even today, let me see if I've wound this one enough, the chronograph seconds hand has a steady sweep. It's more gradual and more obviously sweeping than the stutter step of a 28/8 or 21/6 movement. So it's double step to the eye, but also against the ear where it's tangibly beating faster. And the watch features a full deploying clasp in steel, and a feature I adore on contemporary Zenith straps. There's a rubber underlay to keep the leather young, separating it from the moisture, sweat, and grit of your wrist. We've had some heavy hitters on the show today, and, well, I'm not backing off now. Let's talk about these two. First, here, I have the Lange & Söhne 1815 Perpetual Calendar Rétropente, a timepiece that is 41.9 millimeters in platinum. It's not as big as it looks, but it is an imposing timepiece with extraordinary heft on the wrist. And you can see that with a split-second perpetual calendar dial, it is going head-to-head with the likes of Patek's 5204. The watch, of course, features a full deploying clasp in platinum, but don't take that for granted, as even many premier complications at Lange do not include full deploying clasps. Now, getting a little bit closer, you can see things are fascinating in the use of a set of differentially colored hands for the split-second mechanism. Look carefully and you'll note a feature that the Patek does not include, which is a power reserve indicator for the 42-hour manual wind reserve de marche. Now, moving down, you can see that there is a moon phase. What sets Lange moon phases apart is that they are made of solid gold. Take another look, and you can see that the dial itself is made of sterling silver. So platinum case, gold moon phase, sterling silver dial, flip it over, and it is impressive. This is a movement with 631 parts. And if that sounds like a lot, you're right. The timepiece is glorious, deep, and wonderfully woven of steel, ruby, and of course, German silver. The nickel copper zinc alloy giving it that golden hue. All of the traditions of Lange watch finish are present and correct, as we have half bridges that are freehand engraved. We have mirrored anglage on every surface. Blued screws, but also black polished screws, with blued screws used for assembly, black polished screws involved in the adjustment of the mechanisms. We have golden chaton holding pivot jewels, and the chaton themselves are held in place by screws. You can note that there is a wonderful array of satination across the wheels and the steel components of the chronograph, and as you can see, there is 2 column wheels. You'll also appreciate the fact that the watch features a split-second bridge at center that has a decoupler so that the watch does not drag on the stationary split-seconds hand when it is stationary. That is a sophisticated refinement that very few watchmakers, such as Patek and Lange, incorporate into their split-second chronographs. Now, the Datograph, the original Datograph from 1999, 39 millimeters, platinum, black dial, and yes, the dial here is also in sterling silver. You have the famed double-digit or panorama datum with a pusher adjuster. You have a flyback chronograph. You have a gorgeous balanced dial, technically part of the Saxonia family. Zoom out, throw it on the wrist, and you can see that the 39 millimeter case is universally wearable. Philippe Dufour bought this watch for 2 reasons: the finish and the fit, both of which he told me are ideal. That's high praise. I'm no Philippe Dufour, but I can tell you I see what he sees in the watch: beauty. And nowhere is that more evident than on the case back, where the caliber L951 was considered to be the movement that forced Patek Philippe into a reckoning about its use of Lemania calibers, yes, but also over its actual standards of movement finishing, as this, as impressive today as it was 21 years ago, is a glorious rendition of German watchmaking tradition, but also modern standards, many of which Lange has established. There's no code that says you need to have an engraved balance cock, or that you must put jewels in chaton fixed by screws, or that you need to use a German silver nickel copper zinc alloy to make a movement. Lange made these decisions in the 90s, and in doing so established a standard for German watch finishing that brands as disparate as Glasuta Original and Nomos follow today. You can see that the column wheel is black polished on its top, and as I tilt the watch through the light, you can see just how many black polished surfaces there are here. This is an embarrassment of riches, as good as it gets. A big slow beating balance adjusted in 5 positions with a glorious swan's neck regulator and an overcoil hairspring. And again, a feature you don't often see on Lange watches. This full deployment clasp would have been an expensive multi-$1,000 upgrade at the point of sale. And take a look, a loomed dial. It's more practical than you think. That said, the ultimate Lange on today's show is the 44.2mm rose gold Zeitwerk striking. Now, of course, if we put this one back in motion, you can see why. It's called the striking. It strikes on the hour and it strikes on the quarters. It was the first chiming Zeitwerk, launched 2 years after the original in 2011, and it features all of the functions and finish that people love in the Zeitwerk. Now, of course, the watch features a quick set mechanism, so you can turn it forward, you can turn it backwards, and you can enjoy the digital jumping on cue. Of course, the original Zeitwerk back in 2009, minus the strikers, was the GPHG Aiguille d'Or, so it was the grand prize winner at the Oscars of watchmaking, and it's not hard to see why. What appears to be a frame for the time is actually part of the movement. You can see there's a clear sapphire that acts as the pivot for the minutes discs. That German silver material with the golden hue invested in it by presence of copper. Well, it's the same that you see on the reverse side, and the movement here is spectacular. We saw the linear spring that FP Journe uses as a constant force mechanism, as a remontoir. Well, his linear spring loads up and discharges once every second. This remontoir system loads up every minute when it jumps the minute. So the power goes down from the barrel through a pinwheel air brake and then into this traversing series of locking levers and third wheels. There's a double third wheel with a hairspring between, and that hairspring between is the remontoir. It absorbs 1 minute's worth of energy to keep the balance amplitude consistent. So the barrel, as mighty as it is, and it is mighty, will never directly drive the escapement because it would be too much force. So for the 36 hours that this system is running, it will actually stop itself when it can no longer jump the minutes. The balance amplitude will remain very, very consistent. And you can see here, it too is free sprung and beats away at a stately pocket watch like 18,000 vibrations per hour. Note everything from the stop works to the swan's neck to many of the screws and the cover to the escape wheel, all black polished here. You have that freehand engraving 1-2 times on the movement, and the mainspring is so strong that one side of it is actually anchored to the base plate of the movement for stability. Meaning when you wind a Zeitwerk, you really feel the tightness, the power inherent in that spring. Even fully discharged, that first turn reminds you that you were dealing with a force of nature. It does have a power reserve indicator, and it'll tell you when it's done. 36 hours of reserve, though, so it does need to be wound daily. A small price to pay, and probably a tactile pleasure most of us would easily and happily embrace. Also, take note, those strikers on the dial side, entirely black polished with glorious beveled edges. Everything about this watch exudes artistry. If that's not the last watch, what could possibly be the last watch? Well, this. Launched in 2019 in 100 pieces, the white gold Jaeger-LeCoultre Master Ultra Thin Perpetual Flame K Enamel is the ultimate evolution of Dr. Strange's watch. Yes, it's from that same family, but this is the ultimate Master Ultra Thin Perpetual. White gold case, 100 pieces, Flynn K enamel dial made in-house by JLC. JLC makes this dial, it makes the case, it makes the movement. This is a true manufacturer product. And as you can see, the dial is extraordinarily shaped with a rayon, or a sort of sunburst, not like a brushed sunburst, a deeply grooved guilloche sunburst cut on a rose lathe. The dial base is white gold. A translucent enamel layer is then overlaid and cooked at up to 800 degrees centigrade to create what you see here. So we're talking multiple watchmaking arts: movement, design, assembly, regulation, and finish, guilloche, and enamel. All of that in a 39mm white gold case that's only 10.1 millimeters thick. Turn it all over, you can see second generation caliber 868. Again, Dr. Strange never had it so good. This movement significantly upgrades the original. It's almost twice as much power reserve. The original 868-1 had a 38-hour power reserve. This features a 70-hour power reserve, which is ideal for a complex calendar watch. As you can see, it features real fired blue screws, and it's a good-looking movement. Free sprung for durability, and of course goes through the Master 1000 hours control, which is a test of the fully assembled watch, not just a bare movement. It also uses the IWC Kurt Klaus perpetual calendar system, so if you do fall behind, you just toggle until you reach the current date, and the watch, which features year, decade, century, and even millennium, everything is programmed, including the moon phase, so you just toggle to the current date and everything else adjusts in sync. Throw it on the wrist, it is absolutely mind-bending. The most appealing mass brand watch on the show today. I have no grudge against Richemont if the future of Jaeger looks this good. 100 pieces, exceptionally scarce. This is the first example I have seen. It is not too late to put one of these under the tree or in the stocking. Most notably, it is not too late to put one on your wrist. Reach out to tmosso at thewatchbox.com for purchase and pricing details. And happy holidays.